Lillian Young's face twitched at the sight. He was doing this on purpose, trying to stuff her to death. What a preposterous tactic. However, she had requested these items, refusing them would appear rude and unreasonable, drastically diminishing her image. Bloody hell, he's utterly ruthless. Thank you. Swallowing her anger, she resentfully ate everything and then lumbered away. As soon as she left, Sebastian Ward couldn't hold back any longer and burst into laughter. His laughter echoed for miles, infuriating her. Her permitted range for digestion was now restricted to the light breeze pavilion where she'd stayed last night, followed by a gaggle of maids and guards, practically imprisoned. Who could enjoy a stroll like that? In the end, she could only return to the light breeze pavilion, fuming, to catch up on sleep. Fortunately, Hana-do was there. After chatting for a bit, she yawned and instructed, Hana-do, go back to our old place and bring all my things here. Oh, and give the things in the drawer to Tu-hong. Make it snappy, be back before lunch. Hana-do nodded, memorized her instructions, and hurried out of the Duke's manor. When she awoke, the sun outside was blazing. Even with the curtains drawn, the light was dazzling. She stretched, yawned, and casually asked, "What time is it?" The maid attending by the bed immediately stepped forward and replied, "Your Highness, it's almost noon. His Lordship has sent word, inviting you to dine with him." Hashtag Chapter 29, Averting Disaster, Settling Scores. Oh, is Hana-do not back yet? Lillian Young allowed the servants to dress her, frowning in displeasure. "Miss, I'm back." As soon as she finished speaking, Hana-do pushed the door open, took a gulp of water in the outer room, and carried her cup inside. "I've brought everything. Everyone, come with me." Lillian Young's eyes lit up. Snatching her sash, she tied it herself and pulled Hana-do into a run. Two maids frantically chased after them. The four of them raced to the front courtyard of the Duke's manor, where she directed the others to carry in crates of items. A short while later, Sebastian Ward arrived. Seeing her carrying paintings herself under the scorching sun, sweat covering her face, he couldn't help but step forward to assist. "Let me do it. You go and rest." "Ah, no need, no need. There's not much left. I can manage." "No way." These paintings were her hard-earned trade secrets, how could she entrust them to someone else? Most importantly, many were not suitable for young eyes. Discovery would be disastrous. Lillian Young broke out in a cold sweat, forcing a smile as she declined. "Let go. Go and rest." Sebastian Ward ordered coldly, reaching out to grab the painting. "No." Lillian Young resolutely refused. Each gripping an end of the painting, they wrestled, neither willing to yield. Third brother, third sister-in-law, you're both here." Unexpectedly, Edward Ward arrived for a visit, startling them both into letting go. The rolled-up painting tumbled to the ground. Lillian Young frantically sat down to gather them, Hana-do quickly joining to help. The two were in a flurry of activity. Gasp! Those around them drew a sharp breath. Lillian Young felt a chill down her spine. Looking up, she saw Edward Ward blushing shyly. He was looking at her with a devilish expression, giving her a "you're dead" look. Not good, murderous aura. A chill ran through Lillian Young. Her gaze shifted to the side, meeting Sebastian Ward's furious eyes. He held a painting in his hand, the paper trembling violently, the rustling chien paper crackling with menace. She glanced at it, her face paling, cold sweat beading on her forehead, her eye twitching uncontrollably. "Bloody hell, why that painting of all things? So, my dear sister-in-law has harbored a singular affection for me. Had I known, I would have requested father's blessing for our union sooner." "Alas, shut up." Sebastian Ward flung his hand out, the painting shattering in his grasp. He glared icily at Edward Ward. "Get out." "Ah, my painting." Lillian Young's face paled at the sight of the ruined artwork. She flew at Sebastian Ward in a rage, her hands clamping around his throat. "Replace my painting. Replace it, you bastard, you scoundrel, you villain. Enough." Pushed to his limit, Sebastian Ward's handsome face darkened. He coldly shoved her hands away. "Charlotte Trent, remember my words. Do not provoke me again. Sebastian Ward, let me tell you this, I am my own person, with my own will and temper. I am not your possession. Don't expect to have everything your way. Provoke me again, and we either part ways or die together." Lillian Young bristled like a cat, her aura suddenly fierce. She glared at Sebastian Ward, then turned to gather the fragments of her painting, refusing to even glance at him. Hannah Doe looked anxiously at Sebastian Ward, her loyalty firmly with her mistress. She shook her head slightly and helped Lillian Young collect the pieces. Sebastian Ward's face paled with fury at their defiance. He snapped at a nearby servant, "Bring fire. Burn everything the Duchess brought. You dare." The threat to her paintings ignited Lillian Young's fury. She rounded on the servant, her imperious aura halting him in his tracks. The servant looked from the Duke to the Duchess. Neither showed any sign of yielding. Burn the painting or preserve it? He was caught in the crossfire, his internal lamentations echoing his predicament. Edward Ward, sensing the escalating tension, discreetly slipped away from the Duke's manor. Having been subtly dismissed by his brother, he deemed farewells unnecessary. A tremor ran through Sebastian Ward. He had never lost control like this, his emotions consumed by rage. Twice now, this woman had pushed him to the brink. It was dangerous. He didn't want this, and he certainly didn't want to see her rebellious spirit. Were my words not clear enough? Sebastian Ward's gaze was glacial as he looked at the servant, determined to resolve this quickly and avoid further entanglement with her. "Bring fire." "I said no." Lillian Young glared fiercely at the servant. Caught between a rock and a hard place, the servant stole a glance at the Duke. His mind made up, he gritted his teeth and bowed his head to the Duchess. "Forgive me, Your Grace, but I must obey." With that, the servant swiftly departed, returning shortly with a tinderbox and a brazier. He crouched beside the Duchess. "Please step aside, Your Grace. Do not make this difficult for me. Step aside, my arse." Lillian Young, having never encountered such a stubborn servant, swore crudely. Her eyes, sharp as blades, fixed on him. "You dare touch my treasures, and I'll make sure you regret it." The servant trembled, genuinely afraid to proceed. Sebastian Ward, without a word, snatched the tinderbox from the servant. He pulled out a painting at random, glanced at the reasonably handsome man depicted, and without hesitation, set it alight. "Sebastian Ward, you did this on purpose." The painting was incinerated, and Lillian Young screamed again, lunging at Sebastian Ward like a hungry tiger pouncing on its prey, her limbs wrapping tightly around him, sharp teeth sinking into his arm. "Oomph!" Sebastian Ward cried out in pain, his eyes flashing with icy fury. She was unruly, and needed to be taught a lesson. "You, continue burning the paintings. Don't leave a single one." Sebastian Ward casually tossed the lighter to a servant, his arms firmly gripping Lillian Young who clung to him. Under the astonished gazes of the servants and guards, he departed. Lillian Young, realizing the dire situation, immediately released her bite and struggled to break free from his grasp, desperate to save her unique art collection. Her efforts were futile, causing her to erupt in curses. "Let me go, Sebastian Ward, you bloody scoundrel. If my paintings are destroyed, your days are numbered. I'll make your life a living hell. Do you hear me? Let go." Whack, whack, whack. 3 resounding smacks echoed. Lillian Young abruptly fell silent, her small face first paling with pain, then flushing crimson with shame. That bastard, that absolute bastard dared to spank her. This was an insult to her very being. She would have her revenge. You're too loud. As my wife, you should be seen and not heard. Her rare silence brought a slight curl to Sebastian Ward's lips, his heart filled with amusement and triumph. Miss Hannah Doe, deeply worried, ran after them. Witnessing Sebastian Ward strike Lillian Young, her eyes widened in shock. This was not good. Her miss, always so proud, had been spanked for the first time. The master had made a grave mistake. Her current silence only meant she was plotting revenge. Wiping away cold sweat, Hannah Doe hurried after the pair, then quietly approached Lillian Young, whispering a plea to Sebastian Ward, Miss, please don't be too harsh. After all, the master is your husband. Husband, my foot. Hannah Doe, what has he given you to make you take his side? Remember, you're mine, not his. Don't you dare defend him again, or I'll dock your wages. Lillian Young glared at Hannah Doe, her resentment deepening. Hashtag Chapter 30, I may have caused a catastrophe, miss, I wasn't defending the master, heaven and earth can bear witness. I only care for you. Now that you're married to him, domestic disputes will only harm your marital harmony. Shut up. Lillian Young's head throbbed from Hannah Doe's incessant chatter. Both of you, be quiet. Sebastian Ward's brow twitched, and he turned to cast a cold glance at Hannah Doe. He hadn't missed a word of their conversation, and their talk of revenge intrigued him. Chilled by his glare, Hannah Doe froze, then trailed behind them, sticking her tongue out innocently at her mistress, who was still glaring at her. Lillian Young, exasperated by Hannah Doe's innocence, raised a fist in warning. Her little actions didn't escape Sebastian Ward's notice. Amused by her endearing display, a hint of mirth softened his stern features, and his lips and brows curved upwards. Afterward, Lillian Young was confined, the wicked Sebastian Ward ordering her locked in her room, a formidable line of highly skilled guards stationed outside her door, preventing any escape. Her freedom, once encompassing the entire estate, was instantly reduced to a single room. When Sebastian Ward summoned Hannah Doe, Lillian Young became instantly uneasy, pacing anxiously in her room, gazing out the door, awaiting Hannah Doe's return, praying she wouldn't let slip anything that might reveal her true identity. Half an hour later, Hannah Doe returned, pale as a ghost, frightening Lillian Young, who quickly pulled her inside, bolted the door, and whispered, Hannah Doe, have we been discovered? Hannah Doe shook her head, Miss, His Grace inquired about your paintings. I know that much, get to the point. Lillian Young rolled her eyes, handing Hannah Doe a cup of water to calm her nerves. Hannah Doe took a small sip, then continued, His Grace asked about your paintings. And what about them? What did you tell him? Lillian Young felt a pang of guilt, eager to hear Hannah Doe's response. It was no laughing matter, if he discovered she was the artist behind half those paintings, her neck would surely be on the chopping block. Miss, I fear I've caused a great disaster. Hannah Doe was terrified, tears welling in her eyes. As if you haven't caused enough disasters already. Which one isn't a disaster? Don't worry, this won't be the last. Lillian Young, accustomed to such calamities, offered a comforting pat on Hannah Doe's shoulder. Hannah Doe's distress deepened. She sobbed, This time is different, Mississippi. You'll surely scold me. I told His Grace all your paintings were from the Gentleman's Gazette, not your own work. His face darkened terribly, and I was frightened. Miss, he might shut down the Gentleman's Gazette. The other ladies are in danger. Lillian Young sighed, her anxiety finally subsiding. She gently patted Hannah Doe's shoulder and said confidently, Don't worry, your mistress isn't a fool. I won't let him ruin my enterprise. Hannah Doe, I have an important task for you. Miss. Hannah Doe had a bad feeling, tears welling up as she looked at her. Unfazed, Lillian Young beckoned Hannah Doe closer and whispered in her ear. With each word, Hannah Doe's face grew paler. By the time Lillian finished, Hannah Doe had collapsed to the floor. Ever since her confinement, a new worry plagued her every day, bringing her to the verge of tears. "Your ladyship, it's time for the midday meal." The summer heat was stifling. Roused from a deep sleep, Lillian Young mumbled, "What time is it?" "Your ladyship, it's noon, time for the midday meal." "I've prepared everything. Please allow me to assist you with your toilette," the attendant replied softly, expertly helping her dress. "Dinner?" Lillian Young's face paled, sleep instantly forgotten. Energized by a sudden fear, she rolled out of bed and ran to the door. Seeing Sebastian Ward entering the courtyard, she quickly slammed the door shut and bolted it. The attendant, who had been helping her dress, followed close behind, witnessing the Duchess's panicked retreat. She could only shake her head with a wry smile. This wasn't the first time. Ever since His Grace had burned the paintings and confined the Duchess, the two had been at odds. The Duchess loathed His Grace, refusing to share meals or a bed. It seemed the door would need replacing again. Having secured the door, Lillian Young wasn't idle. She promptly settled at the table, picked up her chopsticks and bowl, and scooped some rice, vowing she'd rather starve than dine with her enemy. She'd barely swallowed half her first bite when the bolted door was kicked open, crashing to the floor. Sebastian Ward sauntered in, dusting off his sleeves, glanced at the ravenous diner, and a smug smirk played on his lips as he cocked a brow. Lillian Young resorted to her usual tactics, slamming her bowl and chopsticks down. Her face contorted in displeasure as she scolded, "While imprisoned, one refuses all visitors. Do you not understand decorum? Get out of my sight, off my territory." "Your territory?" Sebastian Ward scoffed. "All of Trent Manor belongs to me, even you. What territory is yours? Who belongs to you?" "Sebastian Ward, I've made myself perfectly clear. Haven't you heard a word I've said these past 3 days? I belong to myself, not to anyone. I have freedom, human rights, and privacy, which you have no right to violate. Are you thick, or is your hearing impaired?" Lillian Young rolled her eyes, drained a large bowl of soup in one gulp, and then, with a satisfied squint, pulled a slender, custom-made silver toothpick from her pocket and began to pick her teeth with an air of nonchalance. Her uncouth behavior was far from ladylike, even the market women possessed thrice her refinement. Sebastian Ward, however, seemed unfazed, calmly seating himself to dine as if he hadn't noticed. After he'd sampled a few dishes, Lillian Young ceased her toothpicking and offered a helpful reminder. "Oh, I forgot to mention, I have a peculiar habit of marking my belongings. Your Grace, with your vast knowledge, must know that animals mark their territory with distinctive signs, like dogs urinating. I'm a bit more refined. To ensure the food is still palatable, I use saliva. I'm quite full now. Your Grace, please, enjoy your meal. Clear the table." Sebastian Ward's chewing slowed, then stopped altogether. His brow furrowed as he set down his chopsticks and abruptly rose, turning to leave without a glance in her direction. Watching his hasty retreat, Lillian Young was in high spirits. She waved a small hand triumphantly and called after him, "Your Grace, you're welcome back anytime. I'll be sure to prepare an even more flavorful spread." Hannah Doe mentioned a rat infestation. "Perhaps I'll add that as an appetizer tomorrow." "Don't thank me, it's simply a wife's loving concern." The servant clearing the dishes trembled, sneaking a glance at the beaming Duchess. Her hand shook, causing a plate to slip and shatter. Terrified, she fell to her knees, pleading, "Forgive me, Your Grace. It was an accident. Forgive me. Get up. Don't rush. I haven't finished eating. You may leave now and return in an hour to clear the table." Lillian Young, unaccustomed to the servility of the Trent Manor staff, raised a brow and dismissed her. "Thank you, Your Grace." The servant, as if granted a reprieve, kowtowed and scurried away, colliding with Hannah Doe at the door. Hannah Doe, observing the servant's panicked state, felt a sense of déjà vu. The Duke had just exited the courtyard in a similar manner. She eyed her mistress with suspicion. "Miss Lillian, what have you done?" ### Chapter 31, All Things Require Risk. Lillian Young sipped her soup, gesturing to the opposite seat for Hannah Doe to join her. "Sit down." Hannah Doe sat, fidgeting nervously, watching her mistress enjoy her meal. She had a question but, seeing Lillian Young eating fish, waited lest she choke on a bone. "Have you eaten yet?" Lillian Young tore off a chicken leg and offered it to Hannah Doe, then rinsed her hands in the brass basin. "Hannah Doe, is the task I gave you complete?" "Mistress, do you truly intend to take revenge on His Grace?" Hannah Doe, lacking appetite, pushed the chicken leg aside. "Naturally. Think of those illustrations, every one. Painstakingly bartered for by myself and the other ladies. Each draft is priceless, meant to appreciate in value over time. That damned Duke, without a word, burned them all. Watching our fortune vanish into flames is like watching him take our very lives." Lillian Young's fury intensified, her eyes blazing with a desire to personally dismantle Sebastian Ward. Hannah Doe shuddered, pursing her lips. "Mistress's little prank has delayed the Gentleman's Gazette's publication. The printing house took on other work, pushing our date back several days, 10 in total. The other ladies are complaining. If sales are poor, mistress, expect to be torn limb from limb." That is a problem." Lillian Young propped her chin on her hand, her face falling. Preoccupied with revenge against Sebastian Ward, she'd forgotten the publication delay. "Just as I thought, mistress only considers the present, never the consequences." Hannah Doe remained silent, observing her mistress with a mixture of exasperation and sadness. "Hannah Doe, return at once. Tell Helen to inform the printers to release 1,000 copies in the capital to salvage the situation. Then, have them arrange some advertisements. This edition of the Gentleman's Gazette will be a limited release, higher price, fewer copies, but finer quality. Also, notify all branch offices to prepare advertisements, receive stock later, and limit each to 1,000 copies." It was a gamble, and Lillian Young felt uncertain, silently praying to break even. Hannah Doe, sensing the precariousness of the plan, furrowed her brow. "Mistress, how certain are you of this?" Hannah Doe, all endeavors require risk. Regardless of the outcome, one must maintain this attitude. Lillian Young, feeling a pang of guilt, deflected with vague pronouncements, patting Hannah Doe's shoulder with feigned confidence. Hannah Doe gave her a knowing look, picked up the chicken leg, and left without a word. A fortnight later, the Gentleman's Gazette was released in Brighton City. On the Duke's orders, Danny Hayman had queued since dawn, towering over the line of women, enduring the lingering pangs of an insufficient breakfast. He finally secured a copy as the sun climbed high. The moment the magazine was in his hands, Danny Hayman was stunned by the large cover image. His hands trembled, and the magazine thudded to the ground. Recovering, he snatched it up and sprinted back to the Duke's manor, yelling, "Disaster! Something's happened. A terrible thing has happened to His Grace." Danny Hayman's cries drew a crowd of servants, all concerned for the Duke, trailing him to the library. Sebastian Ward, reviewing a confidential missive, frowned at the commotion. He put the letter aside just as a distraught Danny Hayman burst into the library. Danny Hayman ran into the study, saw his master's indifferent expression, and suddenly felt uneasy. This matter was too shocking, he didn't know if the Duke could bear it. "Did you acquire that thing?" Sebastian Ward coldly looked at Danny Hayman, his gaze drifting towards the study's entrance, where he saw the doorway filled with anxious servants. "Are you all very idle?" Sebastian Ward's smile didn't quite reach his eyes, scaring the servants outside the door into scattering. Danny Hayman, feeling the Duke's anger, his legs turning to ice, trembled and hesitantly offered the magazine, softly suggesting, "Your Grace, please calm down. I'll immediately brew some calming tea. Having said that, Danny Hayman, like a startled rabbit, bolted out the door and vanished. Sebastian Ward was somewhat surprised. Danny Hayman was his personal servant, having seen all sorts of situations, yet he had never seen him flee in such fear. Just how appalling was this thing? He was very curious. Danny Hayman had deliberately placed the magazine face down, showing the back cover. Sebastian Ward picked it up, flipped it over, and saw the image of himself naked. Putting aside personal grievances, the artist had drawn it beautifully, capturing his spirit vividly, even the coldness between his brows was clearly depicted. However, this scoundrel deserved to die. He loathed those who fabricated lies and made up stories. The cover depicted him covered in wounds, above which were the bold words, "Duke Clarence is a pervert, indulging in self-harm." The corner of Sebastian Ward's mouth curled into a cold smile, his icy eyes turning sinister. Suppressing his anger, he flipped through the magazine. When he reached the page about himself, he slowed down, carefully reading each word. With each word he read, his brows furrowed tighter, his anger intensifying. By the end, his eyebrows were a single line, the veins in his hand bulging, and the magazine was instantly crushed to pieces. Suddenly, he thought of something and used his qingdong to fly directly to Fleeting Blossom Courtyard where Lillian Young resided. Ha ha ha, this writing is excellent, truly penned by Wen Nuang. Her ability to fabricate stories from pictures is truly extraordinary. Sebastian Ward had just arrived outside the courtyard when he heard her carefree laughter. He knew she had read this preposterous work and, enraged, kicked the door open. With a loud crash, the door shattered. Lillian Young, holding a book in both hands, looked in surprise at the man who appeared outside before dinner time. Her cheerful smile froze on her face, looking rather comical. Hannah Doe was also startled. Seeing the pitiful Duke standing at the door, she felt sympathy for him, fearing he would be agitated if he saw the magazine. Quick-wittedly, she snatched the book from her mistress's hands and hid it. With the book snatched from her hands, Lillian Young finally came to her senses. Immediately changing her expression, she enthusiastically ran toward Sebastian Ward, skillfully undressing him with both hands while wailing dramatically, "Outrageous! That Wen Nuang is outrageous! How could she fabricate such slanderous accusations against your grace? Quickly take off your clothes, let me see if there are any self-inflicted wounds to prove your grace's innocence." Sebastian Ward grasped her small hands, chuckling coldly, "In broad daylight, you wish to molest this duke." This retort successfully silenced Lillian Young. Her hands immediately retracted, wiping them vigorously on her clothes as she stepped back, smiling coquettishly, "Your grace is truly jesting. Molesting is surely a man's prerogative. Ha ha ha, after confirming there are no wounds on your chest, I, your consort, have proven your innocence, demonstrating you have no penchant for self-harm. This king is blameless, you needn't fret, my princess." Sebastian Ward's eyes darkened, his entire being radiating a chilling aura as he warned, "Never look at Gentleman's Gazette again." "On what grounds? Give me a reason first." Lillian Young glared, her defiance melting away under his gaze. "You are this king's princess. Your eyes should hold only one man, be he flesh and blood or ink on paper." Sebastian Ward extended a hand towards Hannah Doe. "Give it here." Hannah Doe, unable to resist, handed over the periodical with trembling hands. The moment the Gentleman's Gazette touched Sebastian Ward's hand, it disintegrated into a flurry of fragments that drifted to the floor. As the last scrap settled, he turned and left, leaving Lillian Young seething but silent. Hashtag Chapter 32, The Missing Marriage Contract. Once he was gone, Hannah Doe breathed a sigh of relief, turning to Lillian Young with a reproachful look. "Miss, the king was truly angered. It's fortunate he doesn't know it was your doing, otherwise, you would be in grave danger." "Jinxes!" Lillian Young rapped Hannah Doe on the head. "He deserves it for provoking me." Consider him lucky I didn't make him streak naked like my older brother. Miss, you are wed to the king, and you have consummated the marriage. He is your husband. What wife schemes against her own husband like this? From now on, your nagging reminds me of something crucial. Lillian Young cut Hannah Do off, her eyes gleaming. Hannah Do, do me a favor and go to the manor storehouse. Find the gift that old codger sent and have it brought here. Now. Hannah Do hesitated. The sooner, the better. Hannah Do, my entire happiness rests on your shoulders. Lillian Young clasped her hands in earnest entreaty. Hannah Do could never refuse her when she was like this. With a resigned sigh, she left to carry out her mistress's willful command. Half an hour later, Hannah Do returned with 2 strapping servants carrying a massive, gleaming golden chest. The chest landed with a thud that spoke of its considerable weight. Lillian Young was momentarily dazzled by the sight of the golden chest. It reeked of her father's nouveau riche extravagance, a blatant display of wealth. The old fox. Inside the chest, a trove of jewels glittered, each piece a treasure, some unique. Lillian barely glanced at them. Her eyes sought a smaller, golden box. She opened it, rare and precious artifacts, but not what she wanted. For nested boxes yielded nothing. The final box, crafted from prized purple sandalwood, the one that should have held the marriage contract, was empty. A flicker of panic touched Lillian Young. Hannah Do, did you touch anything inside? No, I had it brought here the moment I saw it. What's wrong? Is something missing? Hannah Do's face creased with worry. It's gone. The marriage contract is gone. Lillian Young clutched the empty sandalwood box, her mind racing with dire possibilities. The marriage contract in the hands of some strange man, her life reduced to domestic drudgery, chained to children in kitchen. Terror mounting, Lillian Young slammed the box shut, ignoring the guards outside, and bolted. She was intercepted the moment she stepped out the door. Return to your chambers, Your Highness. The guard on the right, face impassive, spoke each word with utmost seriousness. I don't give a damn about your life or death. Lillian Young, driven mad and her mind in turmoil over the marriage decree, had no patience for trickery. She turned on the guards without hesitation, launching a furious, chaotic attack. The prince had ordered the guards to confine the princess, but hadn't authorized the use of force. After all, she was the mistress of the duke's manor. No one dared lay a hand on her. Still, they had to ensure she didn't leave Fleeting Blossom Courtyard. This was an exceedingly difficult task, resulting in a cycle of being knocked down and getting back up. Survival was the only measure of success. Hannah Do trailed behind, watching her mistress send guards flying. She dared not intervene, fearing she'd only worsen the chaos and make the situation irredeemable. Stop! Slap! A sharp command and a resounding crack brought everyone to a standstill. Sebastian Ward, watching the grimacing guards sprawled on the ground, felt his eye twitch. Before his anger could erupt, Lillian Young, the culprit, reacted first, shouting, Hannah Do, smoke bomb. Huh! Hannah Do, momentarily stunned, quickly grasped her mistress's intent. She pulled 2 smoke bombs from her belt, tossing one at the surrounding guards and hurling the other with all her might at Sebastian Ward. Your Grace, look out! Ugh, what is this? It burns. It stinks. Amidst the chaos, Lillian Young and Hannah Do easily escaped the Duke's manor. Avoiding the main gate, they scaled the western wall near the street. In their haste, they toppled a palanquin. A figure in green, clutching a snow-white bundle, tumbled out, causing the onlookers to cry out. Your Excellency! 6th Prince! Oh dear, they'd caused a right mess. Hannah Do landed with a thud, a gleaming blade instantly pressed against her neck. The cold steel jolted her awake. Her face crumpled as she wailed, Mistress, save me. Lillian Young landed in a willow tree. Turning, she saw her foolish mate captured. Beside Hannah Do, a man in green slowly rose. His unbound hair, cascading to his waist, was strikingly beautiful. He cradled a jade-white child, turning gently to look at the child with a soft gaze. "William, are you hurt?" The child merely shook his head, his large, dark eyes filled with fear, but remained silent. The two figures were of incredibly high status. The man in green was Chris Ward, the imperial uncle, younger brother of the reigning emperor. The child in his arms was the emperor's youngest son, Prince William. Ooh, a new subject. Stunning, yet not seductive. A top-tier pretty boy. Chris Ward's moonlit aura and gentle, handsome face immediately captivated Lillian Young. Her gossipy spirit ignited. Forgetting the marriage decree, she approached the man in green for a closer look, intending to capture his likeness in a sketch. "Your Excellency, beware. Accomplices." Before Lillian Young could get close, a row of gleaming swords appeared before Chris Ward, shielding him and the child. The guards, each radiating murderous intent, waited to strike her down in retribution. Lillian Young, without a moment for explanation, faced a barrage of flashing swords. Dodging desperately, she was quickly reduced to a beggarly state, hair disheveled, clothes torn, and body covered in wounds, a truly pitiful sight. "Miss, don't mind me. Flee!" Hannah Do cried, her face ashen at the sight of Lillian's injuries. "Flee? She injured William and thinks she can leave unscathed. Capture her, dead or alive." Chris Ward's expression transformed. His handsome, gentle features froze, his narrow eyes blazing with fury. At his command, the guards swarmed Lillian, their attacks turning vicious, intent on ending her life. A pretty face but a hard nut to crack, Lillian thought, unimpressed. She parried the attacks with apparent ease, but soon faltered, sustaining several deep wounds. Realizing her precarious position, she shouted, "Hannah Do, what are you waiting for? Give em a taste of your hospitality." Hannah Do, snapping out of her stupor, hurled a volley of pepper bombs. Acrid red smoke billowed, filling the air with coughs and cries. Seizing the chaotic moment, Hannah Do hoisted the badly injured Lillian onto her back and plunged through the red haze, escaping across the rooftops. "See to William's care." A man's voice boomed from behind. Both women startled, turning to see Chris Ward burst from the red smoke, a long sword in hand, his exceptional lightness of foot propelling him towards them with terrifying speed. Hannah Do was no match for him. "This time, there's no escape," Lillian sighed, patting Hannah Do's shoulder, signaling her to put her down. She resolved to face her pursuer. Hannah Do, terrified for Lillian's safety, trembled as she shielded her, drawing an ornate silver fan in preparation for battle. "Miss," she whispered, "once I engage him, you must run. Don't worry about me." I leave it to you," Lillian agreed readily, clapping Hannah Do's shoulder. Hashtag Chapter 33, Tears of Frustration. Hannah Do, on the verge of tears, said dejectedly, "Miss, couldn't you at least hesitate a little? Let me know you care. It would make dying worthwhile." Lillian paused, sighing heavily. "I leave it to you," she said, her voice weighted. Still so fake. "I can't feel a shred of sincerity," Hannah Do mumbled, staring glumly at the flagstones. "Don't dawdle, he's coming." Lillian barked, rushing forward to meet Chris Ward. A set of silver finger knives, their blades thin as gossamer yet capable of cutting through gold and iron, appeared on her fingertips. Chris Ward, taken aback by her fierce counterattack, was initially driven back. After 3 exchanges, he rallied, channeling his inner strength. His long sword blurred into a whirlwind of real and phantom strikes, swiftly turning the tide against her. Lillian, aware of the vast disparity in their skills, found herself trapped. She fought desperately, sustaining several grievous wounds. As her injuries mounted, her vision blurred, her mind swam, and her limbs began to move instinctively, dodging blows as if controlled by another. Miss. Hannah Do's face paled as she saw Lillian Young draw the moon sacrifice blade. She rushed forward to intervene, resolutely separating the two combatants and preventing Lillian Young from striking. Miss, don't lose your reason. Withdraw moon sacrifice, quickly. Hannah Do urged while using her silver fan to fend off Chris Ward. Distracted, she glanced back at Lillian Young to see her eyes transforming. The pupils had lost their color, turning a dull gray, and a streak of blood, like ink dropped into water, spread from a single point, gradually dyeing her eyes crimson. This was a sign of Lillian Young losing control. Hannah Do was terrified, her soul nearly leaving her body. She felt the surrounding air shift, a familiar dread pressing down on her, making it almost impossible to breathe. Chris Ward also sensed the danger. His phoenix eyes narrowed, and his long sword, evading Hannah Do, lunged towards the transforming Lillian Young. No. Hannah Do's face was ashen as she watched the long sword thrust towards her mistress, her heart gripped by fear. Lillian Young in her current state couldn't withstand any attack, the consequences would be dire. Uncle, don't hurt her. Arriving just in time, Sebastian Ward, following Lillian Young's trail, saw the long sword aimed at her. His heart skipped a beat, a sense of ethereal emptiness filling him with a fearful unease. Without hesitation, he grasped the blade with his bare hand. Since when had she begun to affect his emotions so deeply? Sebastian Ward's gaze grew complex as he slowly pushed aside Chris Ward's longsword. Chris Ward looked surprised. His eyes flickered between Sebastian Ward and Lillian Young before he spoke, a hint of understanding in his voice. So, she is Sebastian's new bride. Miss, it's all right, it's all right. Calm down, close your eyes, and think of something pleasant. Hannah Do, her face pale with fear of Lillian Young's escalating frenzy, grasped her hand tightly and offered careful counsel. He. Suddenly, Lillian Young emitted a series of fragmented, unsettling giggles that carried a chilling, malevolent air. Her hair gradually faded from black to a vibrant, captivating red, and a murderous aura erupted from her entire being. Sebastian Ward's heart lurched. He paid no mind to Chris Ward, turning instead to look at Lillian Young. Her crimson eyes, radiating a dangerous energy, sent a chill through him, a wave of icy coldness that reached his very core. Charlotte Trent. He tried her name, but there was no response. Poison. Where's Missing Moon? Where did Missing Moon go? Hannah Do trembled, weeping as she frantically searched through her scattered pouch. Silver coins, hairpins, medicinal pills, and various other items spilled onto the ground. The abundance of medicinal pills caught the attention of both Sebastian Ward and Chris Ward, filling them with a mixture of surprise and suspicion. Their brows furrowed, their gazes towards Hannah Do and Lillian Young heavy and complex, a blend of so many emotions that it was impossible to discern their true nature. Ah, I found it. I found it. Hannah Do pulled out a long, ornate needle, her relief evident in her tear-streaked face. With practiced speed, she pinched the needle between two fingers, preparing to pierce Lillian Young's neck. Unexpectedly, Lillian Young reacted with lightning speed. Before Hannah Do could act, she struck out with a palm strike, sending her flying. Hannah Do sailed through the air for 10 meters before crashing heavily to the ground, scattering paving stones and coughing up a mouthful of blood. She lay there, half-sitting, struggling to breathe. Sebastian Ward was stunned. His expression remained unchanged as he watched Lillian Young. This version of her, radiating such intense murderous energy, was utterly foreign and deeply unsettling to him. What's going on with her? Chris Ward was bewildered. Your Grace, help me. Hannah Do was desperate. Suspecting the young mistress's other personality had surfaced, she needed to quickly use the dragon tail needle to render her unconscious and bring her back to the Duke's manor for the elder miss to treat. He can't help you. Lillian Young laughed wildly, her blood-red eyes glancing at the wounded Hanado. Covering her mouth, she sneered, "Long time no see, Hanado. You've grown up." What was happening? Sebastian Ward wondered. Lillian Young's gaze finally landed on him, her eyes holding the imperiousness of a monarch, half disdainful, half mocking, the very picture of an emperor surveying his domain. Sebastian Ward responded with a cold smile. Without needing Hanado's plea, his grip tightened on his longsword, and he lunged towards Lillian Young. His woman, obedience was her only virtue, and she needed to be taught a lesson. Don't hurt the young mistress. Seeing the Duke's ruthless attack, Hanado coughed up blood in alarm, dragging her injured body forward. Chris Ward, observing the maid's desperate attempt, kindly stopped her. "Lass, if you're injured, lie still and don't cause more trouble. Sometimes, a bit of roughhousing between husband and wife strengthens their bond. You'll understand when you're married my arse. Get lost, I haven't time for you." Hanado, rarely vulgar, shoved Chris Ward aside, 2 fingers pinching a dragon tail needle as she joined the fray. "Young mistress, forgive me." While Sebastian Ward was momentarily stunned from a blow to the chest by Lillian Young, his right arm restrained, Hanado seized the opportunity. With lightning speed, she plunged the dragon tail needle into Lillian's neck. Hanado. Lillian Young, feeling a sharp pain in her neck, her expression turning ferocious, glared resentfully at Hanado before collapsing, unwillingly, into Sebastian Ward's arms. Before Sebastian Ward could react, Hanado snatched Lillian, hoisted her onto her back, and leaped onto a willow tree, vanishing in a few swift movements. Chris Ward, his face etched with astonishment, recovered from the shock of being rebuked. Indignantly, he reprimanded his nephew for his poor management of servants. "Sebastian, look at how impudent the maids in your manor are, daring to insult their master. Something's not right." Chris Ward suddenly recalled something, his expression turning grave. That wasn't Charlotte Trent. 3 generations of scholars in the Trent family, both men and women immersed in classic literature, rarely practicing martial arts. That woman's martial skills were exceptional, and her demeanor, unsettling. Sebastian, who was she? Why did she come from the Duke's manor, wearing Charlotte Trent's face? "What brings you here, uncle?" Sebastian Ward didn't answer, instead leading him into the manor. Elder Miss. Help the young mistress." Hanado raced back to Trent Manor, crying and shouting, attracting a crowd of servants and maids. Jasper Young and his wife, returning to the manor, heard the commotion from afar. Rushing towards the scene, they found his sister covered in wounds. Rage surged within him as he clenched his fists, demanding, "Who did this? Who hurt Lillian? Husband, this isn't the time. Quickly send someone to fetch my younger sister so she can treat Lillian." Charlotte Trent, comforting her husband, helped Hanado carry Lillian to a room. Looking at the injured, red-haired Lillian Young, she felt both worried and guilty, repeatedly wiping away tears. ### Chapter 34, Jasper's Predicament. Jasper Young, observing his mother's furtive weeping and comprehending her thoughts, then glanced at his younger sister, his heart heavy, brows deeply furrowed. Perhaps, from the outset, he shouldn't have acquiesced to his father's scheme, allowing his third sister to be offered as a bride to Duke Clarence. What happened? Why is the third young mistress injured? Brian Young entered, his face etched with worry, his old features reddening with anger as he glared at Hanado. "Tell me, who hurt the third young mistress?" "It's all father's fault. I initially disagreed with Jasper being married off to Duke Clarence. Now Jasper's hair has turned red, Duke Clarence must have done something to her." Jasper Young's voice was thick with anger, his words sharp and unyielding. Brian Young's aged face crumpled, his frustration erupting in a roar. How is it solely my fault? I did consult you all, and at that time, didn't you also agree? Second daughter, fourth daughter, everyone agreed. What's all this commotion? Silence. Catherine Young, having rushed back to the manor, witnessed the father and son's quarrel. Fury surged within her. She shot a fierce glare at the two before addressing Hannah Doe and Charlotte Trent. Sister-in-law, help Hannah. Doe, take Jasper to my alchemy room. Second sister, is there a connection between third sister's hair and her injury? Charlotte Trent, startled by Lillian Young's crimson hair, was deeply concerned. This was another secret of the Young family, one that concerned Lillian Young. Catherine Young, unwilling to elaborate, turned coldly and departed to prepare the necessary medicinal ingredients. Charlotte Trent, sensing a dismissal, felt a chill of unease but refrained from further inquiries, assisting Hannah Doe in escorting Lillian to the alchemy room. Lillian Young was brought into the alchemy room. Catherine Young dismissed everyone, even Hannah Doe's personal maid. The door closed, leaving behind a palpable air of anxiety. Master, young Master Southwood has come to propose marriage again. Just as the door closed, a commotion erupted in the courtyard. Old Truman, the gatekeeper, shuffled his aging frame towards them. Again. Brian Young, his patience wearing thin, waved his sleeve dismissively. Send him away. With the second daughter in this state, who has the mind to deal with him? But. Old Truman hesitated, his face creased with concern. Young Master Southwood seems to know that the second young mistress has returned. He says he won't leave until he sees her. He won't leave. Brian Young's voice rose in exasperation. Close the gates, release the dogs, and have him beaten off the property. Yes, master. Old Truman, disapproving of his master's harsh methods but powerless to intervene, could only furrow his brows and shake his head as he departed. Wait. After Old Truman had taken a few steps, Jasper Young called out, pausing in thought. Tell Neil Southwood that the young mistress is out on business and that he should return another day. What are you doing? Brian Young's eyes, bloodshot with rage, fixed on his defiant son. You've been quite rebellious lately, boy. I believe your hide needs a tanning. What's all this noise? Anyone who continues this racket will never speak again. The door abruptly swung open, revealing Catherine Young, her face a mask of displeasure. She glared at the two boisterous men, then slammed the door shut after they exchanged a tense stare. Her threat hung in the air, silencing everyone. An eerie quiet descended upon the area outside the door. Catherine Young, releasing a pent-up breath, produced a crimson pill and administered it to Lillian Young. Swiftly, Lillian Young stirred, her eyes fluttering open, a sinister smile playing on her lips. Venomous touch, it's been a while. Your poison is as potent as ever. Cease your prattle. Catherine Young fixed her with a stern gaze, the iciness in her eyes deepening. Why have you awakened, Lillian? Call me Lillian. The Youngs never acknowledged me, Lillian is my rightful name. Her other persona now awake, Lillian Young furrowed her brow in displeasure, languidly rising from the bed and slipping on her embroidered shoes, preparing to depart. As she reached the door, a poisoned needle whizzed past, narrowly missing her. Catherine Young, wielding another poisoned needle in her hand, warned, before you answer my question, you will not leave this room. I have a 10-year agreement. Once fulfilled, I shall return your precious, dutiful Lillian Young. Lillian offered a sly, bewitching smile, then flung open the door and darted out like an arrow loosed from its bow, a gust of wind in her wake, vanishing in the blink of an eye. Miss Hannah Doe, most familiar with her ways, was the first to react, giving chase a moment later, as the others finally regained their composure. Jasper Young stormed into the alchemy laboratory, demanding in frustration, Second sister, how could you let her go? She will return, there's no need for concern. Catherine Young gazed towards where Lillian had disappeared, her expression growing complex. She couldn't help but add, perhaps she's right. We never truly treated her as family, clearly another Jasper. That's why there's such disappointment and heartache in her eyes. The others remained silent, her words striking a nerve. Their faces grim, they dispersed one by one. In the stillness of the night, a single lamp flickered within the Duke's manor. Sebastian Ward lowered the book in his hand and opened the rosewood box on the table. He withdrew a red-covered marriage certificate and slowly unfolded it, his gaze falling upon the blank space where the groom's name should be. Beside it, in delicate script, was her name, Lillian Young, sealed with a bright red imprint. Uncertainty gnawed at him, casting doubt upon her purpose in infiltrating the Duke's manor disguised as a stand-in. Should I trust her? Despite his lingering suspicions, his hand moved of its own accord, dipping the pen in ink and filling the empty space with his name. Their names now side by side, Sebastian Ward stared at them, a slow smile eventually gracing his lips. His finger traced her name as. He softly sighed, perhaps fate has decreed that we belong together. Lillian Young, wherever you may go, I shall be your final and only haven. A month later, in the Schuyler Kingdom, within the band Summer Inn, in the finest room, Lillian Young awoke to the brilliant morning light, as if emerging from a long, drawn-out dream. She felt utterly exhausted, devoid of all strength. A coolness against her chest, something placed there causing discomfort, made Lillian Young frown. Reaching up, her hand brushed against a cold silk cord. With surprise, she pulled it out, revealing a blood-red lucite pendant hanging from the red silk. The pendant was peach-shaped, with a hollow center containing a single drop of red liquid that gently swayed with her movements. What devilry is this? She never wore jewelry. How did this come to be? Lillian Young, as if struck by lightning, sat up abruptly in bed, scrutinizing the lucite pendant, trying to discern its origin. Wait, that wasn't the point. The point was, where was she? Lillian Young quickly surveyed her surroundings, certain this wasn't a place she knew. A chill crept into her heart. Surely not. Had that handsome man from that day captured her and imprisoned her? Ah, this red gown. Lillian Young, seeing herself in a crimson dress similar to a bridal gown, panicked. Barefoot, she bolted from the bed towards the door. Just as she reached for the handle, it was pushed open, sending her tumbling to the floor. Apologies, miss. I didn't know you were behind the door. A man dressed as an innkeeper stood outside, holding a basin of hot water, stammering his apologies. Lillian Young's eyes lit up. Like a carp leaping from water, she sprang to her feet, grabbed the innkeeper's shoulders, and demanded, "Where am I? Who are you?" Chapter 35, You're hiding something from me. The innkeeper, giving her a strange look, stammered, "Miss, this is, the band Summer Inn in the Schuyler Kingdom. I'm a waiter here." Schuyler Kingdom? Lillian Young couldn't believe her ears. Her voice rose to a shriek, her eyes wide with disbelief, her expression terrifying. The innkeeper trembled before her, stammering, It is the Schuyler Kingdom, why, miss." Before he could finish, Lillian Young had completely fallen apart. Clawing at her hair, she muttered, "How is this possible? I just went to sleep. How did I end up in the Schuyler Kingdom, thousands of miles away? Ah, my head is spinning. What's going on? This whole alien abduction thing is ridiculous. Miss?" A sudden, questioning voice made her weep with relief. Looking up, she saw the familiar face of Hannah Doe. Tears welled in both their eyes as they embraced. "Hannah Doe, it's so good to see you. It means we're still in the same dimension. You scared me to death." Lillian Young patted Hannah Doe's back excitedly, using the other girl's pain to confirm that this wasn't a dream. Hannah Doe winced, ignoring the pain in her back. "Miss, where have you been for the past month? I've been chasing after you all the way here. I was so scared. If anything happened to you, how could I face the master, the young master, and the sisters at Snow Aroma Pavilion? Oh, miss, why are your lips so swollen? Ah. Lillian Young covered her mouth. Her fingers brushed against her lips, feeling the burning sensation. Her face paled, then flushed crimson. Fury blazed in her eyes as she roared, "Who dared steal my first kiss? Didn't you give your first kiss to the prince? How else would the poison have been cured that day?" Hannah Doe was utterly bewildered. Cough, cough. Hannah Doe, some things are best left unsaid. Lillian Young choked on her words, mortified enough to want to bury Hannah Doe alive. "Miss, you've been away for a long time. The prince must be worried. We should return to the capital as soon as possible." "Hannah Doe, how did I get to the Schuyler Kingdom?" All she remembered was being beaten senseless, chased by a handsome man, and then nothing. The unease of missing memories made Lillian Young very anxious. Hannah Doe glanced at her, unsure how to lie. Everyone at Young Estate knew about the Miss's possession, but they didn't want her to know. "You're hiding something from me." Seeing Hannah Doe's evasive glance, Lillian Young, knowing her maid well, instantly realized something was amiss. "No, no, absolutely not." Hannah Doe, her thoughts seen through, startled, hastily shook her head and waved her hands to prove her innocence, afraid of revealing any flaws. Her eyes dared not meet Lillian's as she lowered her head and blurted out, "Miss, do you remember the gentleman we met when we left the Duke's manor?" "I do. Not bad looking, just a terrible personality." Lillian Young recalled the day she was beaten so miserably, her brows furrowing unconsciously. That gentleman was exceptionally handsome, and Miss wanted to include him in the next installment of Chronicles of Majestic Landscapes, so she followed him to the Schuyler Kingdom. This lie was so difficult to tell, even she didn't believe it. Hannah Doe shamefully lowered her head, licking her lips as she racked her brains for what to say next, how to avoid arousing her mistress's suspicion. Lillian Young listened silently to Hannah Doe's story, saying nothing, waiting for her to finish. After a long silence, Hannah Doe finally thought of a way. Clenching her fists to encourage herself, she continued, "Then, Miss, your whereabouts were exposed, and you were ambushed from behind by the gentleman's servants. They knocked you unconscious with a wooden club as thick as a bowl's rim. Then, they stuffed you into a sack, threw you onto a carriage, and took you straight to the Schuyler Kingdom. To save you, I endured the grief and gritted my teeth, following them and waiting for an opportunity. Finally, I rescued you, right here, right now. A wooden club as thick as a bowl's rim? How painful that must have been." Lillian Young fearfully touched the back of her head, feeling a lump beneath her fingers, still vaguely sore, despite knowing Hannah Doe was lying. Seeing Lillian react to her words, Hannah Doe pressed her advantage, wanting to solidify her belief and dispel any doubts. "That gentleman is out on business and will return to the inn in half an hour. Let's leave while they're not here. Late last night, I overheard the gentleman talking to his servants. He said he was going to the graveyard 10 miles outside the city today to dig a pit to bury you alive. He must be leading people to dig the pit now, just waiting for nightfall to bury you, Mississippi." To urge her to leave quickly, Hannah Doe began to threaten her, mysteriously whispering in her ear. Doing this for the first time, her skills were still unrefined. Instead of scaring Lillian, she frightened herself into a cold sweat. Lillian Young, wise and perceptive, knew Hannah Doe was hiding something. Whatever it was enough to keep Hannah Doe tight-lipped, and no matter what she tried, she couldn't get the truth out of her. She could only temporarily let it go and observe, giving Hannah Doe some leeway for her first attempt at a frightening lie. Thus, a half-suspicious, half-frightened, very unnatural and strange expression appeared on Lillian Young's face, looking somewhat terrifying. Even her voice became gloomy. Then what are we waiting for? Let's pack our things and leave quickly." Did it work? Why did she feel so uneasy, as if she were being toyed with by her mistress? Hannah Doe watched Lillian leave like the wind, tilting her head in confusion. "What are you still standing there for, waiting to be buried alive, you silly girl? Seeing Hannah hadn't caught up, Lillian Young turned back to urge her on. "Ah, coming, coming." Hannah Doe, no longer confused, quickly chased after her. The two raced all the way back to Brighton City, returning to Young Estate half a month later. It was the height of summer, the sun blazing. Mistress and maid, having traveled for half a day, were hungry and exhausted, sweating profusely as they rode straight into the estate. As the two entered the gate, they were struck by a blaze of red. Under the harsh sunlight, a tall man stood in the courtyard, his back looking somewhat familiar. Hearing the sound of hooves, the man quickly turned around, his familiar face instantly brightening Lillian Young's expression. Why was this fellow here? All this red must be for a proposal, right? Duh, I've finally found you. Neil Southwood, overjoyed to see her, beamed and walked towards her, extending a hand as if to help her dismount. Feigning innocence, Lillian Young tugged the reins, urging her horse forward to avoid Neil Southwood. Turning back to Hannah Doe, she said, "Hannah Doe, Master Southwood has come personally to propose. Given his status and character, it's a good match. If you marry him, I'll have peace of mind. I just heard him call you Duh, so intimate. He's certainly closing the distance between you two. Pick a good day and get married." Huh? Hannah Doe's eyes widened, staring blankly at Neil Southwood. A moment later, goosebumps erupted all over her skin. Shaking her head, she refused. "I, Hannah Doe, vow to serve my lady for life. I've never considered marriage." Duh. Man, Lillian, it's you I want to marry, not Hannah Doe." Neil Southwood knew she was playing dumb, embarrassed by her deliberate words. Fortunately, as a merchant, thick skin was a common advantage, easily deployed. Thinking of his incompetent nephew, what problem couldn't be solved? Lillian Young shuddered at the intimate address. She'd met plenty of brazen individuals, but none so thick-skinned. She'd implicitly refused his proposal, even kindly offered him a way out, yet he persisted. Hashtag Chapter 36, Does it matter whom I marry? You again. An angry voice boomed from afar, causing Neil Southwood's face to drain of color. He trembled, then quickly adopted a fawning, friendly expression. "Young uncle, your nephew greets you. Go on. Don't bother my girl. She's already married," Brian Young said, rudely shoving Neil Southwood. "Forgive my impertinence, but dare I ask whom Lillian married? His name, his family, where does he live?" Neil Southwood interrupted Brian Young, asking with a polite smile. The second daughter was a substitute bride, and the man she married was royalty. If discovered, it would be treason. Naturally, the details of her husband's family couldn't be revealed. Brian Young, flustered by the question, scratched his head, unable to answer. "Does it matter whom I marry?" To rescue her father's few remaining hairs, Lillian Young reluctantly spoke up, further annoyed by Neil Southwood's intrusive questions. Neil Southwood, adept at reading faces in the marketplace, instantly detected her displeasure. Observing her expression, he knew she was angry. "Lillian, don't misunderstand." Neil Southwood felt a twinge of shame and frustration. Countless women in the capital adored him, he'd never been so disliked. Lillian has just returned from a long journey and must be tired. "I'll come to formally propose tomorrow. Young uncle, I take my leave." Staying longer would only deepen her aversion. Wisely, Neil Southwood retreated, planning his return for the next day. "Impossible. You still want to come back?" Lillian Young's eye twitched violently as he politely withdrew. His parting words ruined her mood, draining her energy. Rolling her eyes, she snapped, "Don't come tomorrow. Take your betrothal gifts with you. A woman with a child doesn't take two husbands. If you're happy, I'll let you go. Most men are fickle. If you're ever neglected, my arms are always open for you to lean on." With these dashing words, a smug Neil Southwood departed. Under the blazing sun, faced with the handsome, wealthy man's direct confession, she felt no flutter of affection, only a surge of rage. Bloody hell, someone give me a knife. I'll stab that bastard. How dare he curse my marriage to fail? After confirming her suspicions, she realized her wretched father had slipped the marriage certificate into the betrothal gifts, which were now in Sebastian Ward's possession. That scoundrel. He's a good actor, watching me make a fool of myself without changing his expression. Knowing the marriage certificate was gone, Lillian Young, fuming, returned to her room to vent her frustration by sticking pins in a doll. She'd just affixed Sebastian Ward's miniature face onto the figure when a sweat-drenched Hannah Doe burst in, gulping down the cold tea on the table. Seeing her drenched in sweat, Lillian Young asked curiously, "Where have you been running around like a madwoman?" "It's bad. Neil Southwood is here again." Hannah Doe gasped, her face pale. Hearing his name, Lillian Young's face darkened. "Ignore him. That old fox will deal with it. But this isn't a solution. Neil Southwood comes to propose every day. Miss will surely grow tired of it." "How about," Hannah Doe trailed off, looking at her with a sly grin. "Returning to the Duke's manor?" Lillian Young replied with a smile, then continued, readily agreeing, "All right, on the condition that we find a way to make His Grace invite me back. If we return on our own, not only will it be embarrassing, but he'll also laugh at us." Hannah Doe pouted, perplexed. Scheming wasn't her forte. Miss was clearly making things difficult. She had no intention of returning to the Duke's manor. How cunning. "Fine. With your intelligence, I fear I'll never return to the Duke's manor. I have a task for you, follow His Grace and see where he goes." Lillian Young, disguised as Charlotte Trent with a simple hairstyle and changed clothes, headed out. Hannah Doe, puzzled, trailed behind her. "Why follow His Grace? Where are you going, miss?" "To hunt for handsome men, of course." Lillian Young replied with a mischievous grin. The triennial imperial examinations brought talented men from all over to the capital, offering a chance to discover new beauties for the Gentleman's Gazette. She wouldn't miss this opportunity. Today was the day the results were posted. The top 3, regardless of their looks, possessed talent. A hero deserved a beauty, a scholar a fair maiden. How could her triennial Gentleman's Gazette special be without them? In the Scholars' Pavilion, Lillian Young ordered a pot of clear wine and some snacks. Sitting barefoot on the windowsill, she poured herself a drink, her eyes gleaming as she stared at the crossroads, awaiting the top scholars' parade. He's arrived, he's arrived. The top scholar is heading towards Scholars' Pavilion. Scholars' Pavilion again. This year's scholars are also from Scholars' Pavilion. Scholars' Pavilion's reputation is soaring again. Business is about to boom, sigh. A waiter dashed from the crossroads into Scholars' Pavilion, his face beaming, causing a stir of excited chatter amongst the patrons. "The wine in." Lillian Young's hand trembled slightly, spilling a few drops. Her beautiful eyes narrowed as she gazed into the distance. In less than half an hour, the resounding clang of gongs and drums echoed from afar. The main street outside Scholars' Pavilion was packed with people craning their necks, eager to catch a glimpse of the top scholar's countenance. The owner of Scholars' Pavilion instructed the waiters to prepare strings of firecrackers, ordering them to be lit as soon as the procession appeared at the crossroads. Boom! The deafening firecrackers exploded, filling the air with smoke. Lillian Young, perched on the window sill, choked on the fumes, coughing for a long while before finally stopping. She awkwardly took a sip of wine and, looking up, saw the long procession at the crossroads. The top scholar, riding tall on horseback and clad in a triumphant red robe, waved to the crowd. His peach blossom eyes darted flirtatiously towards the pretty maidens and young brides, eliciting continuous screams and feints. Chaos erupted on the street. This top scholar is quite the flamboyant rake. Pfft! Lillian Young spat out a mouthful of wine, staring at the top scholar in astonishment, her mouth agape and eyes wide. How can this be? The top scholar is him. A notorious flower thief, brazenly taking the imperial examination and placing in the top 3. Transforming from black to white, now using his official authority to steal flowers and herbs everywhere. Your Majesty, are you unwell? Waiter, I want a whole watermelon, the bigger the better. Lillian Young jumped barefoot from the window sill, pushed open the door of her private room, and shouted to the waiter downstairs, and a basket of chicken eggs. Bring me all the chicken eggs in your kitchen. I want them all. Huh? The waiter downstairs looked at her quizzically, clearly confused. Lillian Young tossed 10 taels of silver to the waiter. This is your tip. Now hurry up and fetch what I need. The faster, the better. Yes, Mississippi. Just a moment. Rewarded with the generous tip, the waiter, though still puzzled, cheerfully went to fulfill her request. In less than the time it takes to drink a small cup of tea, the waiter brought the requested items to her private room. With practiced deftness, he placed 6 watermelons and a basket of chicken eggs on the table, inquiring obsequiously, everything you requested is here, Mississippi. Do you have any further instructions? Just say the word, and I'll attend to it with utmost haste. Satisfied with the 6 watermelons, Lillian Young nodded at the waiter. She then selected the largest one and went to the window. Holding the watermelon in one hand and aiming with the other, she squinted at the top scholar's detestable face, preparing to throw. Hashtag Chapter 37, a scene of utter chaos. Do you wish to have the watermelon cut, miss? The ever-attentive waiter stepped forward with a cleaver, offering, allow me to take care of that small task for you. Lillian Young glanced at the waiter, her gaze drawn to the cleaver in his hand. She was sorely tempted to snatch it and hurl it at her target. However, on second thought, Andy Bloom hadn't truly wronged her. At most, she found his philandering ways distasteful and felt a righteous urge to teach him a lesson. A bit of discipline was fine, but taking a life seemed excessive. All right, put the knife down. Truly fearing she wouldn't be able to resist splitting the watermelon, Lillian Young sighed regretfully, telling the waiter to withdraw, quashing her impulsive notion. Yes, then I'll be going. The waiter smiled, retreating from the private room, and the instant the door closed, he froze in astonishment. He saw Lillian Young brace the large watermelon with one hand, twist her waist, and with a graceful lean, hurl the melon out the window, targeting Andy Bloom on horseback. After the watermelon launched, she calmly yelled down, Andy Bloom, I love you. Having shouted, her figure flickered, dodging to the side. Her fingers hooked swiftly, snapping the window shut to conceal herself. Then, as cries erupted from below, Lillian Young pushed the window open again, peeking out before pelting the crowd with eggs one by one. The waiter stood dumbfounded. By the time he recovered, all 6 watermelons were gone, and the egg basket was half empty, dozens of eggs flung into the street below. The waiter, his face a mask of distress, watched in disbelief as she continued to hurl eggs, his curiosity compelling him closer to the window. What's happening? The waiter gaped. This was the most disastrous scholar's parade he'd ever witnessed. Miss, what grudge do you bear against the scholar, to unleash such viciousness upon his triumph? Chaos reigned below. Fruits and vegetables flew through the air, interspersed with the occasional egg, all aimed at Andy Bloom. Despite his considerable martial arts skills, he couldn't defend against the barrage. Less than half an hour later, Andy Bloom was a pathetic sight, covered in leaves and egg yolk, his red robes transformed into a green and red mess. Thankfully, his face was shielded, otherwise, he'd be a swollen pig's head, his reputation ruined. With each egg that flew, the waiter glanced at Lillian Young. His repeated looks became a silent reproach. Slightly embarrassed, Lillian Young explained as she threw, have you heard of filling a carriage with fruit? It's how a woman expresses her affection. Don't mind me. Expresses affection. The waiter's mouth twitched. Miss, don't take me for an illiterate fool. Filling a carriage with fruit isn't done like this. At least they use fruit, not vegetables, and you've switched to eggs. This is clearly a personal vendetta. Who are you trying to confess to? A furious question suddenly erupted from the window. Both turned their heads. Lillian Young, startled, instinctively took 3 steps back. Sebastian Ward, his face a terrifying mask, had somehow appeared at the window, the egg she'd just thrown still in his hand. He landed gracefully beside her. Seeing her bare white feet, anger flared in his eyes. Put your shoes on. Why are you here? Lillian Young, no longer daring to throw the egg in her hand, slipped on her embroidered shoes and sat at the table. Filling a carriage with fruit? Sebastian Ward gritted out each word, a clear sign of his fury. He'd spotted her since the watermelon incident. The "I love you" had been particularly jarring. Had he not seen her subsequent egg-throwing, he would have lost all reason and dragged her back to the manor. I'm just jesting, do not take it seriously. Lillian Young, noticing his anger and forcing a strained smile, quickly changed the subject. When did your grace arrive? Sebastian Ward flung the egg in his hand, imbuing it with 7/10 of his internal force, enough to cause injury, aiming it directly at the wretched Andy Bloom. Somewhat startled by his action, Lillian Young moved to the window to observe, silently hoping the egg would find its mark. She was disappointed, Andy Bloom narrowly avoided it. Sensing something amiss, Andy Bloom grew wary, his eyes darting around. Fearing discovery, Lillian Young quickly ducked out of sight. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. More eggs flew through the air. Lillian Young stared, dumbfounded, as Sebastian Ward, his expression unchanged, continued to pelt the newly appointed scholar, chosen by his own father, the king. He hated Andy Bloom. Impossible. As she stood there bewildered, an egg was presented to her. Lillian Young looked incredulously at Sebastian Ward, and under his cold gaze, tremblingly accepted it. Once you've thrown it, come back to the Duke's manor with me. Yes, your grace. And so, the waiter, on the verge of tears, could only watch as the couple pelted the newly appointed scholar with eggs, their audacity boundless. Nay. A sudden horse's whinny from outside startled Lillian Young, causing her to drop the last egg. It landed not out the window, but at Sebastian Ward's left foot, shattering. Lillian Young's eye twitched. My apologies, your grace, she said, forcing a smile. My hand slipped. You. Return Jasper to me. A furious shout came from the street before Sebastian Ward could speak. Andy Bloom, having identified his assailant, turned an ugly shade of green. The horse, struck by Sebastian Ward, bolted towards the scholars' pavilion, scattering the crowd, who scrambled to avoid being trampled. Suddenly, a raggedly dressed child was shoved into the path of the runaway horse. Look out! Lillian Young cried, diving from the window like a swallow from its nest. She scooped up the child and rolled across the ground, narrowly avoiding the horse's hooves. Lillian! Sebastian Ward, his face pale, followed her out the window a moment later. He dispatched the crazed horse with a single blow, then turned a cold gaze on the furious Andy Bloom before silently helping Lillian to her feet. Are you all right? Lillian Young, her face pale, offered a weak smile to the child she still held protectively. The child, stunned into silence, finally burst into tears. Wah, that was scary. Don't cry, it's all right now, it's all right. Lillian Young slowly got up, sat on the ground, and gently comforted the child. After a while, the child calmed down. Lillian Young, breathing a sigh of relief, looked down and noticed her bloodstone amulet, tied with a red string, lying on the ground. She instinctively touched her neck, realized it was gone, and quickly picked it up, tucking it into her sleeve. Sebastian Ward saw her conceal the bloodstone, and his gaze turned icy, a chilling frost descending upon his features. A month ago, she vanished from the Duke's manor without a trace. Around the same time, the Sterling family, prominent for 3 generations, was massacred, and their heirloom, the Heartlock bloodstone, was stolen. Why does she possess the stolen bloodstone? Was she involved in the Sterling's demise? The timing is certainly suspicious. Right then, tell me, whose child are you? Lillian Young, her right shoulder dislocated, struggled to rise from the ground, helping the child up as well. She was stunned to see a bloodstone identical to her own hanging around the child's neck. Hers had fallen out during the tumble. Is this a coincidence, or? Lillian Young's eyes darkened as she touched the bloodstone in her sleeve. A sense of foreboding washed over her. This suddenly appearing bloodstone felt ominous, a harbinger of trouble. Perhaps she should discard it. #### Chapter 38, Her wicked delights. The child, clearly worried about the bloodstone, quickly tucked it back inside their clothing, looking at her anxiously. Let me see your hand. Sebastian Ward, his face impassive, took her right hand to examine the injury. Ow, that hurts. Lillian Young winced, her teeth gritted in pain. Couldn't you be a bit gentler? Ever heard of tenderness? She complained. Ignoring her, Sebastian Ward supported her right arm with one hand and firmly pressed down on the dislocated joint with the other. A sharp click echoed as Lillian Young jumped, crying out in indignation, You did that on purpose. Are you trying to cripple me? That hurt. I've never met a man so rough with a lady. I regret marrying you. Sebastian Ward's icy glare silenced her. She pouted, her lips trembling with suppressed frustration. You again. Andy Bloom leaped off his horse and stormed towards them. Seeing Lillian Young, his expression changed as quickly as a turning page, anger morphing into an exaggerated display of affection. My darling. A day without you is like 3 autumns. I've been lovesick since our parting, yearning for this moment. I went to Trent Manor, but you were nowhere to be found. Where have you been all this time? Are you well? Have you missed me? With every word Andy Bloom uttered, Sebastian Ward's face grew colder, the air around him crackling with barely contained fury. Standing beside him, Lillian Young, sensing the escalating tension, felt a thrill of malicious amusement. She was sorely tempted to goad them into a brawl. Someone, take this scoundrel who dares to harass the Duchess to the dungeons. At Sebastian Ward's command, several figures materialized from the shadows. In a blink, Andy Bloom was bound and dragged away. Andy Bloom, stunned by Sebastian Ward's words, only realized he was being arrested when it was too late. His face turned ashen as he looked reproachfully at Lillian Young. Darling, tell me it's all a lie. You're not a duchess, are you? And this, ruffian, surely he can't be the Duke. Well, he is the Duke of Clarence. And a right ruffian, too, Lillian Young added silently. Delighted by Andy Bloom's predicament, she smiled slyly, feigning innocence as she twisted the knife. And you seem to have mistaken me for someone else. I'm not your darling, and I've never met you before. I am Mrs. Clarence, Charlotte Trent. Good day. Andy Bloom stared at her in disbelief, speechless, allowing the guards to lead him away. Her morbid amusement, toying with others. Sebastian Ward couldn't help the twitch in his eye, masking all emotion as he said, Bring the child back to the Duke's manor. Bring the child along. Lillian Young looked at him in surprise, receiving a confirming glance. She said cheerfully, unexpectedly, Your Grace is a kind soul. I admire that. Come, little one. The child shyly glanced at her, then turned and ran toward Sebastian Ward, clinging tightly to his leg without letting go, saying nothing, just staring up at him. Sigh, little tyke, don't set yourself up for disappointment. Lillian Young was quite disgruntled. He clearly wasn't fond of children, so what was with the child's look? Choosing the iceberg over her, wasn't that just asking for trouble? Sebastian Ward looked at the child, his brow furrowed, finally yielding to its persistence. He bent down, scooped the child into his arms, and said softly, "I know you're frightened. From now on, you can live peacefully at the Duke's manor. Will they come back again?" The child, terrified, burrowed deeper into Sebastian Ward's embrace. "No one can guarantee that. You must learn to be strong, learn to protect yourself." Sebastian Ward spoke sternly, like a schoolmaster giving a lesson. The child trembled, a flicker of disappointment crossing their face. As the last glimmer of hope faded, only determination remained in their eyes. "I must live, then find him and avenge my parents and grandfather." Revenge? That's not a pleasant word. Lillian Young felt uneasy hearing the child speak of vengeance. A child of 8 or 9, growing up with such thoughts, their future held either forgetting or killing. "Little one, you're so young. Your long life has just begun. Don't let hatred blind you, living in a hell of revenge. Happiness and vengeance never intersect. The closer you get to vengeance, the quicker you'll lose happiness." Such words coming from her mouth. Sebastian Ward watched her gently admonishing the child, his feelings a complex mix. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Lillian Young felt uncomfortable under his sharp gaze. His response was a cold, rigid back. Lillian Young followed behind, rolling her eyes and muttering, "Madman, forgot his meds today, eh? So strange." Back at the Duke's manor, Lillian Young was intrigued by the rescued child and the blood-red lucite pendant they wore. Lucite was often priceless, beyond the reach of ordinary people, let alone blood-red lucite of such exquisite color. The child, dressed in rags like a beggar, shouldn't have possessed such a thing. This child definitely had a story. Touching the blood-red lucite pendant she'd placed back around the child's neck, she decided to probe. So pitiful, so young to have lost loving parents. "I heard the Sterlings were massacred, not even the chickens and ducks were spared. It's fortunate this one escaped. I've heard talk of this. Heavens, the Sterlings, 3 generations of officials, deeply trusted and favored by His Majesty. With this incident, His Majesty has ordered His Grace to investigate and punish the perpetrators. The Sterlings were all of martial background, a true martial arts family. To be wiped out like this, the culprit must be formidable, possessing exceptional martial skill. I pray His Grace encounters no danger in this investigation." "Ah. Your Highness." 2 maidservants, gossiping in hushed tones, startled at the sight of Lillian Young, knelt and bowed. "Your servant greets your Highness." "Rise." Lillian Young, having overheard their conversation, inquired with a serious expression, "Do you know that child?" The 2 maidservants exchanged uneasy glances, remaining silent. "Do not be afraid, I mean no harm. I simply wish to know his name." Lillian Young softened her voice and offered a reassuring smile. Seeing her smile, the maidservants visibly relaxed. After a moment's hesitation, they replied, "Your Highness, the child brought back by His Grace is the young master of the Sterling family, Mortimer Sterling. He is 8 years old." "Yes, I understand. You may go and prepare some refreshments. I shall speak with the boy for a while." A heavy weight settled upon Lillian Young's heart. The blood ruby around her neck suddenly felt like 1,000 pounds, threatening to break her neck. Lillian Young didn't know how she arrived at Mortimer Sterling's door. Hesitating whether to knock, she heard voices within. It seemed Sebastian Ward was questioning the child, and she could faintly hear sobbing. "You say you saw them? Do you recall their appearance?" Sebastian Ward's voice held a note of uncertainty. "Red hair. One of them, a woman, had red hair, and her eyes were red too, and her clothes. Like a demon. Each of her 10 fingers wore a peculiar weapon, like crescent moons, the other's eye. I don't remember clearly." Mortimer Sterling was terrified, unwilling to relive the horror of that night. Mr. Sebastian, please, don't ask anymore. I'm scared. The child's description mirrored Lillian Young on the night of the incident. Sebastian Ward felt a heavy weight in his chest, speechless and conflicted. He desperately didn't want to believe the boy. Weapons on all 10 fingers. Like crescent moons. Lillian Young suddenly recalled her own weapons, the moon sacrifice, which matched the description perfectly. She'd heard they were unique, the only ones in existence, as their creator had died, the moon sacrifice being his final work. Chapter 39, What great enmity is this? How could this be? The moon sacrifice, the blood ruby, the Skylar kingdom, each piece flashed through her mind, like a broken string of beads being restrung. Both the timing and the weapons pointed to her. The thought was terrifying. A chill ran through Lillian Young, and she couldn't help but tremble. Perhaps she suffered from some strange ailment, like sleepwalking or a fugue state. Yes, a thorough examination was in order. Lillian Young clenched her fists, turned, and left the Duke's manor, heading straight for the Green Bamboo residence outside the city. The Green Bamboo residence, located outside the city of Zhaojing, was originally a summer retreat for the Young family. On Lillian Young's 16th birthday, Brian Young gifted it to her. She later transferred ownership to the impoverished scholar Maurice Blackwood to establish a clinic, on the condition that he serve as the exclusive physician for Snow Aroma Pavilion, providing free healthcare to the courtesans. Carefully disguised, Lillian Young scrutinized her reflection in a mirror. Satisfied that she was unrecognizable, she donned a wide-brimmed hat and entered the southern bamboo forest. Arriving at the Green Bamboo residence, she saw a long queue of patients waiting to be seen. A sense of pride and satisfaction filled her. Next month's dividends would be substantial. Her investment had been wise. However, given the circumstances, by her turn, night would have fallen, making it impossible to enter the city. A cunning plan formed in Lillian Young's shrewd eyes. Feigning a swoon, she collapsed, transforming into an emergency patient, guaranteed immediate attention. Look! Someone's fainted. Oh, it's a young lady. She must have a serious ailment. Miss, wake up. Her sudden collapse startled the queue of patients, creating chaos as people crowded around for a better view. The old woman behind her, with a worried expression, crouched down and applied pressure to Lillian's philtrum. Tears welled in Lillian Young's eyes from the pressure, but she gritted her teeth, afraid to move or make a sound, lest her ruse be discovered and she suffer the full force of the old woman's 9-in white bone claw. Seeing no response, the old woman pressed harder, then, increasingly frantic, began slapping Lillian's face, gentle at first, then escalating into resounding whacks, following a steady rhythm. At this rate, her face would soon swell like 2 steamed buns. Madam, do we have a quarrel? Shouldn't you fetch a physician instead of this half-baked first aid? Stop hitting me. I truly can't endure this any longer. What's happened here? A cool, clear voice cut through the commotion. Lillian Young, inwardly thrilled, couldn't help but smile, relief and a touch of triumph playing on her lips. Ah, it's Physician Blackwood. Physician Blackwood, please examine this young lady. We don't know what ails her, she suddenly fainted and won't wake up. The patients parted, making way for Maurice Blackwood. The old woman eagerly yielded her place. Maurice Blackwood looked down at the woman on the ground, one eyebrow arched in displeasure. Then, with a detached air, he addressed his assistant, Lou Grace, help her into the consulting room. Yes, sir. Lou Grace stepped forward and, like someone handling a chick, grabbed Lillian's collar and led her after Maurice Blackwood. Inside the consulting room, Maurice Blackwood cast a cold glance at the still feigning Lillian Young. Throw her onto the examination table, he ordered, his voice laced with malice. He emphasized the word throw. Lou Grace, understanding his intent, subtly channeled his inner strength, preparing to toss her. No. No need to trouble yourself, sir. I can get on the table myself. Lillian Young, her charade exposed, opened her eyes and glared at the obedient Lu Grace. Put me down, she said, a touch of chagrin in her voice. Lu Grace hesitated, looking to Maurice Blackwood for permission. Only after a nod did he release Lillian Young. Newly liberated, Lillian Young promptly took the offered seat and extended her left wrist for Maurice Blackwood to take her pulse. Physician Blackwood, she declared with a grave expression, I am ill. I know, Maurice Blackwood replied, taking her pulse. Lillian Young raised an eyebrow. You know what ails me? Maurice Blackwood fixed her with a cool gaze. Hysteria. A chronic condition. I'm serious, Lillian Young retorted, her eyes flashing with annoyance. And I am not. Maurice Blackwood's own annoyance flickered. Then, noticing something unusual in her pulse, his expression shifted. Be quiet. Don't distract me. Maurice Blackwood's expression shifted, and Lillian Young, startled, looked at him anxiously, stammering, No, could it be, is there truly an ailment? Shut your trap, quiet. 10 minutes later, Maurice Blackwood finished taking her pulse. Seeing her drenched in sweat and her expression panicked, he felt a surge of satisfaction, a hint of amusement flickering in his eyes. It was thanks to her that he'd switched careers midstream, transforming from a down-on-his-luck scholar into a physician of some renown. He recalled the days she'd forced him to study medicine, a veritable trial by blood and tears. Maurice Blackwood, do I have some sort of illness, like sleepwalking, or soul-splitting? Lillian Young touched the bloodstone hidden in her bodice, dreading the answer. Maurice Blackwood remained silent for a long moment before finally speaking, Why do you ask? There's something I'm not sure I should tell you. Lillian Young hesitated. She looked genuinely troubled, a side of Lillian Young he'd never seen. A strange discomfort settled in Maurice Blackwood's chest. He said in a low voice, I'm not interested in your affairs. If you want to determine whether you're experiencing soul-splitting, I can help you. We can try a different method. Truly. Lillian Young looked at him with a flicker of hope, then asked anxiously, Will it be troublesome? Will it take a long time? What drivel? If you don't want to spend the time confirming it, then get out of Green Bamboo residence immediately. You're an eyesore. Maurice Blackwood's words belied his thoughts. Even as he scolded her, he instructed Lu Grace to temporarily close up shop. Lu Grace, that's enough patience for today. Tell everyone outside to go home and come back tomorrow. What are you gawking at? Follow me to the alchemy room. Seeing she hadn't moved, Maurice Blackwood casually plucked a silver needle. With a flick of his sleeve, the needle flew from his hand, aimed directly at her face. Lillian Young leaned aside, catching the silver needle between two fingers. She chuckled, reminding him, misuse of company property requires compensation at market value. This needle originates from the deft hands of Mike Tyson, each needle is precious. Do you intend to work for me for the rest of your life to repay the debt? Before attempting extortion, one should ascertain the value of what they hold. The deft hands of Mike Tyson. It's nothing more than something I had Lu Grace purchase for 3 coins the other day. Even if I stuck the whole lot into you, I wouldn't bat an eye. I can still afford this paltry sum. Maurice Blackwood gave a sardonic smile, casting a disdainful glance at her. He'd never met anyone as shamelessly avaricious as Lillian Young. Even a speck of dust falling from her could, in her telling, transform into a priceless treasure. Her attempted extortion backfiring spectacularly, Lillian Young gave a strained laugh and returned the silver needle, receiving a basketful of icy glares in return. Fuming inwardly, she followed Maurice Blackwood into the alchemy room. Maurice Blackwood instructed Lu Grace to prepare a large tub of hot water, light incense, and add several medicinal herbs to the water. He tested the temperature with his hand, and when it was just right, he turned to Lillian Young, who was curiously poking around nearby. Undress. Ha! Lillian Young's immediate reaction was to cover her chest with her hands and glare at him. What are you trying to do? I have no such intentions towards you. Forcing me is useless. #### Chapter 40, You're the one who's blind. Lillian Young's words darkened Maurice Blackwood's face with a mixture of embarrassment and anger, tinged with a strange ache of annoyance. Rest assured, I've never had any interest in you. In my eyes, you've never been a woman. That's you, blind fool. Lillian Young retorted, her contempt dripping from every word. Even so, I won't let you casually ogle my body. What do you want? Either strip, or get out. I won't bother with you anymore. If you're sick or in pain, find someone else. Maurice Blackwood, tired of her nonsense, tossed the needle pouch and turned to leave. With a splash, water erupted from the tub, drenching Maurice Blackwood. A wet strand of hair clung to his face. As he slowly turned, Lillian Young was already in the bath, submerged up to her neck. Seeing his sorry state, she couldn't help but laugh. Maurice Blackwood, know what a drowned rat looks like. That's you right now. Ha ha ha. You. Maurice Blackwood, unwilling to argue, grabbed the needle pouch and approached, his tone sharp. Turn around. I need to administer the acupuncture. More acupuncture. Lillian Young's voice suddenly rose, disbelief etched on her face. After a moment, she asked fearfully, You wouldn't take this opportunity for revenge, would you? Don't compare my integrity to yours. Maurice Blackwood's voice dripped with sarcasm as his skilled hands swiftly and precisely inserted needles into several acupuncture points. Only after he finished did Lillian Young notice the scent of incense permeating the room. A numbness crept over her, her mind slowing, her eyelids heavy. It was over. She'd been completely duped. Damn it, his integrity was far worse than hers. You, remember, this. With those furious words, Lillian Young succumbed to unconsciousness. You've done well. After she fainted, the door opened, and a man entered. Clad in red, he wore a silver fox half-mask, revealing thin, cold lips curled into a faint, lingering smile, wicked and arrogant, sending chills down one's spine. His eyes were deep and dark, unreadable, yet exuding an inexplicable menace that dared not be met. My lord. Maurice Blackwood bowed his head respectfully. Yes, rise. Nathaniel Knight glanced indifferently at Maurice Blackwood before stepping around him to Lillian Young's side. Looking at the unfamiliar face in slumber, Nathaniel Knight gave a cold laugh, his disgust evident. So ugly. How can she be worthy of sharing Lillian's body? Maurice Blackwood shuddered, stealing a glance at her, his gaze distant, his thoughts unknown. Have you prepared everything I require? Nathaniel Knight unfastened the jade pendant at his waist, deftly opening a small compartment, and retrieved a turquoise pill, which he placed in Lillian Young's mouth. My lord, please wait. Don't give her the soul-severing pill. Its potency is extreme, frequent use will shorten her lifespan. Maurice Blackwood instinctively stepped forward to intervene, then instantly regretted his outburst. He was always calm and composed, never overstepping his bounds before his lord. Ha, ha, ha. Nathaniel Knight's laughter was jovial, yet his eyes remained icy. Are you instructing me on how to conduct my affairs? Maurice Blackwood would not dare. Recognizing his lord's anger, Maurice Blackwood immediately knelt, seeking punishment. I have overstepped. I beg your forgiveness, my lord. Leave me. Nathaniel Knight proceeded to administer the soul-severing pill, watching as Lillian Young's hair gradually transformed from black to blood red. Only when the transformation was complete did a smile grace his lips. He leaned down, placing a gentle kiss on her forehead, and whispered tenderly, Welcome back, Lillian. Lillian Young's other persona, spurred by the soul-severing pill, awakened. The one who opened her eyes was Lillian, her eyes blazing like fire. Lillian was deeply suspicious. She only awoke when Lillian Young's life was in danger, and once awake, only by her own volition could Lillian Young return. She sensed no danger within her consciousness, so how? Lillian. Her lack of response displeased Nathaniel Knight. He stroked a lock of her red hair, prompting her to return to the present. Nathaniel Knight, why are you here? Lillian frowned, understanding everything the moment she saw him. Fury burned in her eyes. Did you force me awake? Lillian, I will give you eternity. Nathaniel Knight ignored her anger, smiling as he kissed her lips, his low, magnetic voice whispering in her ear, come with me. Forget her existence. You will permanently replace her and become the true Lillian, the Lillian who belongs only to me. Nathaniel Knight, what do you intend to do to her? Had she done something wrong, causing him to misunderstand and develop inappropriate feelings? Lillian stared at Nathaniel Knight, her voice hard with barely contained rage. Nathaniel Knight's eyes darkened, turning into the icy streams they once were, chillingly cold. Lillian knew he was angry. Her heart softened. Nathaniel Knight, she said gently, meetings between people are fated. Fate is beautiful because it is nurtured by time. No one can force it. If you stubbornly try, what you receive is only misfortune. Don't hurt her. Is that all you want to say? Nathaniel Knight's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Lillian nodded, the memory of their moonlit kiss a month ago tugging at her heart. Her gaze softened as she gently caressed his face, sighing. Nathaniel Knight, she said with a touch of helplessness, we are not suited for each other. Did I say such a thing? Danger flickered in Nathaniel Knight's eyes. He gripped her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. No one can stop me from doing anything, not even you. Lillian, you ruin every good thing. Don't provoke me again. I want to be with you, properly. With that, a disappointed Nathaniel Knight flung his sleeve and left. Lillian watched his retreating figure, bitterness and a pang of sorrow filling her heart. She, too, wanted to be with him, but she was merely Lillian Young's shadow, unable to offer him her whole self. Maurice Blackwood pushed open the door. He felt a strange unease looking at the wickedly alluring, red-haired Lillian Young, even though he knew she was Lillian Young's other persona. Let me remove the needles for you. Maurice Blackwood moved towards Lillian awkwardly. Lillian, finally regaining her composure, gave him a cold glance and spat out two words, get out. Stunned by her forcefulness, Maurice Blackwood hesitated for a moment before turning and leaving, closing the door behind him. Her aura was powerful, he felt utterly powerless against it. This Lillian Young wasn't lovable at all, he didn't like her. Should he really leave her like this? He fingered the blue porcelain bottle in his hand, hesitant. Maurice Blackwood, get out here. Get out here, now. Angry roars erupted from the alchemy room. Maurice Blackwood, knowing she was awake, his earlier hesitation forgotten, pushed open the door with a grin. Right then, Maurice Blackwood, you dare to plot against me. Speak, how will this be resolved? Lillian Young, fully dressed but with disheveled hair, glared furiously at him. Congratulations, you're ill. Maurice Blackwood casually delivered the frightening news, infuriating Lillian Young. You've been hoping I'd fall ill, haven't you? What's your motive? Could it be you want to monopolize your medicine? Too much chatter. Perhaps another girl would be better, quieter at least. Maurice Blackwood tossed her the prepared soul-shifting pill, a sudden heaviness settling in his heart. Lillian Young accepted the blue porcelain bottle, her face tense as she asked, is it truly soul detachment? Surely not. Well, is it serious, to the point of indiscriminately slaughtering an entire family? Chapter 41, Soul Detachment or Sleepwalking. Take the medicine and leave quickly. 1 pill a day, you'll be cured in 3 months. Unable to bear her anxiety, Maurice Blackwood waved her away. Remember to pay Lou Grace on your way out. 1 pill, 1 tael of silver, 102 pills in total. Recorded in the ledger for commission, pay 100 taels. 100 taels. Are you robbing me? Lillian Young stared at the porcelain bottle, her face a mask of misery as she contemplated returning it. If you've agreed, then that's it. You're not losing out. Maurice Blackwood calmly tidied the alchemy room, not sparing her a glance. Maurice Blackwood, don't forget your Snow Aroma Pavilion's private physician. I pay your monthly salary, don't even think about squeezing money out of me. Lillian Young declared triumphantly. How could he forget that? He might as well consider it a gift of medicine, especially that medicine. Maurice Blackwood recalled his master's instructions, then looked at her smug expression. Any lingering guilt he felt towards her vanished instantly. Lou Grace, see the guest out. Lou Grace acknowledged and approached. Seeing the blue porcelain bottle in Lillian's hand, her eyelid twitched. She glanced at Maurice Blackwood before gesturing for Lillian to leave. Lillian Young, having been shown out of Green Bamboo residence, suddenly remembered the purpose of her visit and stormed back into the alchemy room. What is it now? Maurice Blackwood asked, feeling a twinge of guilt at her return. You still haven't told me about the illness. Is it soul detachment or sleepwalking? Is it so severe that I can't control my own actions? Neither. Maurice Blackwood looked at her, then said with a hint of mischief, it's a common ailment among women, insufficient blood and qi, irregular menstruation. Ah, oh. Lillian Young suddenly understood, breathing a sigh of relief. It seemed the Murong family incident had nothing to do with her. What a relief. However, hearing a man discuss female reproductive issues made her feel uncomfortable. Her blush deepened with each thought. Without waiting for Lou Grace to escort her, she quickly left Green Bamboo residence, practically sprinting back to the Duke's manor. Outside the manor, she collided with Hannah Doe, who was arriving for work, and they both tumbled to the ground. Hannah Doe, pinned beneath Lillian, gasped for air, her hands raised in supplication. Miss, please get up. I'm being crushed. Hearing the desperate cry, Lillian Young rolled off, quickly helping her half-dead maid to her feet. Miss, why are you back already? Hannah Doe asked, a mixture of relief and annoyance in her voice, shooting Lillian a reproachful look. Hadn't she said she wanted the Duke to invite her home? Hannah had been running all over trying to track the Duke's movements, and here was her mistress, back at the manor without a word. Enough, enough, I won't ask any more. Since we've arrived at the Duke's manor, you should first pay your respects to his grace. Hannah Doe, seeing Lillian's remorse, generously forgave her. Hannah Doe. Lillian Young's face paled, her eyes wide with terror and panic as she looked at Hannah Doe. What theatrics were these now? Hannah Doe fearfully retreated 3 steps, her expression guarded as she looked at Lillian, stammering, Miss, what are you doing? My face is ruined. Lillian Young cried as she ran, leaving a bewildered Hannah Doe to chase after her. It itched so unbearably she wanted to peel off her skin. Lillian Young frantically scratched her face, her hands rubbing aggressively, feeling as if thousands of ants were biting beneath her mask, a tingling, itching torment that clawed at her heart and liver. Seeing Lillian scratching her face like a monkey, Hannah Doe worriedly trembled, Miss, what's wrong? Did something get on your face? Hannah Doe, quickly closed the door, bolt it, don't let anyone in. Upon entering the bedroom, Lillian Young instructed Hannah Doe to close the windows, then hurried to the dressing table in the inner room. She opened her jewelry box, retrieved the medicine for her mask, went back to the outer room, poured half a cup of clean water into a teacup, and applied 2 drops of the medicine to her face. Preoccupied with her face, her vigilance dropped to 0, oblivious to Sebastian Ward sitting on the bed in the inner room, and even more so to his displeasure. Sebastian Ward silently watched her busy herself, treating him as if he were air. His fists clenched, knuckles cracking, wanting to pull her close and punish her. This woman was too arrogant, too dismissive of him. Ah! Outside, Hannah Doe screamed upon seeing Lillian's face, pointing at it in stunned disbelief. "Miss, your face." I know. Seeing Hannah Doe's reaction, Lillian Young knew her face must be a horrifying sight. Tears welled in her eyes. "That damned Maurice Blackwood, he must have done something to my face while I was unconscious. Ah, this is infuriating. It itches so much. Hannah Doe, quickly find the detoxification pill and the restoration balm." Hannah Doe rushed into the inner room. Sebastian Ward instinctively dodged, leaping onto the roof and landing on a rafter to silently observe the mistress and maid's actions. Lillian Young scratched at her true face, tormented by the itching pain. Impatient with Hannah Doe's slowness, she stormed into the inner room to search herself. The angle of the light and her position were just right. As soon as she entered the inner room, Sebastian Ward saw her clearly. A single glance shattered his usual composure, nearly causing him to fall from the rafters. Was that even a human face? It looked somewhat familiar, as if he had seen it somewhere before. "Miss, I found the medicine." Crash! Hannah Doe dropped the porcelain bottle in her hand, her eyes nearly popping out of their sockets. Horrified, she had only been gone for a moment to fetch the medicine. How could the Mrs. face have changed so drastically? Was this even a human face? "Hannah Doe, do you want me dead?" Seeing the shattered restoration balm, disbelief washed over Lillian Young, followed by a surge of rage. She grabbed Hannah Doe's throat and yelled, "My restoration balm! My face! Do you know how difficult it was to obtain? Hannah Doe, I traded 3 months of being a living subject for venomous touch acupuncture to get that. 30 needles a day, for 3 whole months. Ah, it's itching me to death. Give me the detoxification pill." Such a roar, combined with her flushed, pimple-ridden face, was more terrifying than the depths of hell. Hannah Doe's legs turned to jelly, and she collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath, letting Lillian snatch the detoxification pill from her hand like a bandit. Lillian Young swallowed the detoxification pill and, trembling, glanced at the bronze mirror. One look was almost enough to make her vomit. Her legs gave way, and she slumped onto a chair, her eyes vacant. After a long while, Hannah Doe slowly crawled up from the floor and anxiously helped Lillian onto the bed. "Don't worry, Mississippi. It's getting late. Get some sleep. Perhaps your face will recover by morning. If not, we'll go to the eldest miss for more medicine tomorrow." Still in a daze, Lillian Young allowed Hannah Doe to guide her to the bed, staring blankly at the bed canopy. Seeing her like this, Hannah Doe felt uneasy. She extinguished the lamp and went out, deciding to return to Young Estate that night to seek medicine. With Hannah Doe gone, only Sebastian Ward and Lillian remained in the room, one on the bed, the other hidden in the rafters. A single oil lamp cast a faint glow, making everything appear hazy. Sebastian Ward, his expression impassive, silently watched Lillian. Only after she fell asleep did he glide down from the rafters, quietly sit beside the bed, and carefully observe her face beneath the mask. One look was all he could bear. It was truly an eyesore. The corner of Sebastian Ward's mouth twitched. He gently brushed aside the stray hairs on her face, then touched her forehead, confirming she wasn't feverish before quietly leaving. Chapter 42, Poisonous Revenge. Leaving Lillian's room, Sebastian Ward went directly to his study, his body radiating a murderous aura. He summoned his shadow guards, Jonathan, Josh. 2 black-clad shadow guards instantly materialized in the study, bowing respectfully, awaiting his commands. "Jonathan, find the man called Maurice Blackwood. Bring me his corpse. Josh, go to the palace and get some soothing ointment from royal physician Lyle." Sebastian Ward spoke with a hint of irritation, an unnamed fury simmering within him. The next day, Lillian Young, troubled by her facial affliction, woke early. Fearing her true identity would be revealed, she prepared herself at dawn, donning a veil. She planned to have a maid relay a message that she had contracted a strange illness and couldn't go out, let alone be approached. Hana-do would have been the ideal messenger, but where has that lass gone? Lillian Young muttered, sitting before her vanity mirror, staring at her unsightly reflection in the bronze. Thankfully, at least the agonizing itching from the previous night had subsided. Your Highness, are you awake? A maid knocked at the door. Lillian Young adjusted her veil and opened the door herself. Opening the door, she was astonished. 4 or 5 maids stood in a neat line outside, each holding something different, toiletries, food. The first maid carried a basin of hot water and led the others inside, single file. They set down their burdens and left, the last maid carefully closing the door behind her. None of them reacted strangely to Lillian's attire or appearance. Had the Duke's Manor's servants reached such a level of discretion? Unbelievable. If she ever left the Duke's Manor, she'd have to poach them all. Lillian Young, calculating her next move, removed her face veil and began her morning ablutions, washing her face and rinsing her mouth before enjoying a hearty breakfast, complete with a specially purchased large bun from Sina's bakery. Scarcely half an hour after she'd finished, a maid arrived to clear away the breakfast dishes and wash basin, appearing and disappearing so silently that Lillian felt a prickle of unease, compelling her to stop one of the maids with a question. Tell me, aren't you the least bit curious about my attire? The words tumbled out, a foolish question even to her own ears. The maid, understanding her meaning, offered a placating smile. Please do not worry, Your Highness. His lordship gave explicit instructions that you were not to be disturbed and wished for your swift recovery from the chill. A chill? When had she caught a chill? Lillian Young blinked, her face draining of color. Had he been here last night, witnessing everything? Terror, pure and cold, gripped her. Instinctively, Lillian touched her face, her fingertips recoiling from the grotesque, bumpy texture. In that moment, she felt a perverse gratitude for her disfigured features. Perhaps, just perhaps, he wouldn't have noticed anything amiss. Miss. I've got the medicine. Hana-do burst through the door, startling Lillian so badly that she fled into the inner room, diving under the covers with a practiced grace born of guilt. The entire sequence was executed with a swiftness and precision that would have been admirable under different circumstances. Hana-do, seeing only a flash of white disappear into the inner room, knowingly closed and bolted the door before entering. Miss, no need to hide, it's me, Hana-do. Oh, it was that blasted girl. Lillian Young threw back the covers, glaring at Hana-do. You wretched girl. Your mistress is in dire straits, and you're gallivanting about, oblivious to everything. Where have you been? Where else would I be? Fetching the restorative ointment from the eldest miss, of course. I told you before I left, miss, have you already forgotten me? Hana-do grumbled, handing over the hard-won remedies. I explained everything to the eldest miss, and she not only gave me the ointment but also a pill specifically for the poison on your face. Poison? Truly poison. That despicable Maurice Blackwood. To think he'd use poison on a friend for a mere 100 taels of silver. Before Lillian could fully vent her fury, Hana-do interrupted with a blunt, you can't blame Maurice Blackwood for this, Mississippi. You brought this upon yourself. What do you mean by that? Lillian Young bristled. You recklessly used the third Mrs. things to concoct that mask you're wearing. You didn't even use the antidote before trying it on, that's why you're in this state. Hana-do gave her a, you're an idiot look, then pulled an exquisite jade box from her bosom. I went to the Snow Aroma Pavilion. These are 2 new masks made by the second miss, one to use and one as a spare. A miracle. My maid has finally shown some foresight and meticulousness. Congratulations, Hana-do, your brain finally seems to be functioning. This was the most sensible and impressive thing she'd ever seen Hana-do do. Lillian Young, overcome with joy, embraced her maid. "Don't celebrate too soon," Hana-do said, pulling away, her face etched with apprehension. "Miss, there's something I need to tell you." What is it?" Anything involving venomous touch came with a steep price, often paid in blood. Seeing Hana-do's expression, Lillian Young tensed. "Miss, next month is the master's birthday celebration. And the young master, currently studying medicine at Azure Mountain, will return for the celebration." Hana-do swallowed hard, her face etched with dread. "The eldest miss finds him troublesome, so she wants you to look after him, and escort him back to Azure Mountain." "What?" Lillian Young's jaw dropped. She hastily shoved the items Hana-do had brought back into their place, pushing Hana-do away. "Quickly, return these things. A bad complexion is a small matter, it won't kill me." Was this some kind of joke? Having her take care of that little devil would make her life a living hell. Hana-do wailed, "The eldest miss said all sales are final. I already tried to refuse. It was useless." "Hana-do, retract that statement. You're such a fool. Oh, you've doomed me." Lillian Young wanted to cry but couldn't. Snatching the items back, she asked miserably, "How long does the medicine last?" "I paid a hefty price. It can't possibly mean I'll be out of commission for 10 days to half a month, can it?" 3 days, and your face will be completely healed, without a single scar. Your skin will become even more supple." "Stop, enough." Just for a face, she had to pay with her life. The thought made her feel utterly cheated. Imagining the consequences of adamantly returning the goods, Lillian Young shuddered. She tipped her head back and swallowed the specially formulated antidote pill, then resentfully opened the restorative ointment and applied it. 3 nights later, Lillian Young sat before her vanity, staring in disbelief at her reflection. She felt as if she were in a dream. She touched her face, marveling at its silken smoothness. Her skin, just as Hana-do had promised, was supple, fair, and made her look younger. Of course, she was already quite young, very young. The eldest Mrs. concoctions are as potent as ever. Hana-do exclaimed, gazing at Lillian Young's face with awe and admiration. "Don't forget, this potency comes at the cost of a month of misery for both of us." Lillian Young's spirits plummeted at the thought of the little imp at Azure Mountain. She sprawled listlessly on her bed. Hana-do stood beside the bed, her face downcast. "Compared to the young master, your face is the most important thing, Mississippi. What would happen if your face were ruined? What if the Duke finds you unattractive? Don't forget, I'm currently wearing my sister-in-law's face. What does beauty or ugliness matter?" Lillian Young shot Hana-do a languid glance. "I haven't slept well these past few days. I want to catch up on my sleep now." Hana-do, set up the melody of enchantment array. "I don't want Sebastian Ward seeing me like this." Chapter 43, With the Thief, rest assured, Mississippi, leave this small matter to me. Hana-do puffed out her chest confidently. She retrieved a thin red string from a chest, adorned with numerous tiny silver bells. At the slightest touch, the bells tinkled merrily. "Quietly. Don't let them ring." Lillian Young, having just closed her eyes, opened them again to glare at Hana-do at the sound of the bells. Hana-do stuck out her tongue sheepishly, striving to minimize the jingling. She tiptoed around, carefully completing the array. Finally, satisfied that nothing was amiss, she nodded and quietly left. Since her confinement for beauty treatments, Sebastian Ward had stealthily entered her room each night, surreptitiously applying the ointment Josh provided. Tonight was no exception. Amidst the quiet stillness, he once again slipped into her chamber. A single oil lamp illuminated both the outer and inner rooms, its flame flickering low, the wick nearly consumed. Sebastian Ward took the small, silver poker beside it and nudged the wick, coaxing the light to brighten slightly. Turning towards the inner chamber, his steps faltered, nearly tripping over a red string that triggered a silver bell. Sebastian Ward narrowed his eyes, observing the small anti-theft mechanism set within the room. Simple, yet easily overlooked, leading to its activation. Why such a measure? He glanced at the large bed 10 paces away, now draped with curtains, a recent addition. Had her face fully recovered? A slight smirk played on Sebastian Ward's lips as he stepped lightly, his form blurring into a shadow, swiftly bypassing the trap and landing soundlessly before the bed. What did she look like now? Hesitation flickered in Sebastian Ward's eyes, his outstretched hand pausing midair. Finally, he drew back the curtains, a smile instantly gracing his lips, his heart stirring. He had commissioned inquiries, acquiring a vast collection of her portraits from various sources, capturing her in countless poses. Among them, one depicted her laughing amidst a profusion of peonies, chin resting on her hands, her beautiful eyes languid, her demeanor playful and endearing. She was even more captivating in person. Within the warm red canopy, her face was like jade, her willow leaf brows slightly furrowed, her long lashes like fans, her lips naturally crimson. Her dark hair cascaded across the pillow, the covers drawn to her chest, one delicate white arm resting outside the quilt, her skin as smooth and flawless as porcelain. If only you weren't a daughter of the Youngs. Sebastian Ward's thoughts stalled, his starlit eyes darkening. His index finger gently traced her red lips, his heart trembling in response. Alas, what was he to do with her? His father awaited his answer regarding the Sterling family's annihilation. Tonight, conflict raged within him, preventing any decision. Sebastian Ward brushed his lips against hers, then rose and silently departed. An hour later, Lillian Young abruptly awoke, invigorated. Leaping from the bed, she triggered the sound array set by Hannah Doe. The red string swayed, causing the silver bells to chime, startling her into momentary paralysis before her senses returned.